when former European Commission President Jose Manuel Barroso announced he would be taking a job with U.S. investment bank Goldman Sachs, the outrage and condemnation came hard and fast.
Morally, politically, ethically, it is Mr. Barroso's mistake. It's the worst thing a former president of the European institution could do to the European project, at a time in history when the Union needs to be supported, carried, and reinforced.
Barroso will be the chief lobbyist for Goldman Sachs International in Europe, but his shift into the private sector is consistent with a trend that's been around for decades. It's what's known as the revolving door, the movement of high-profile public sector officials into private sector jobs and vice versa. Regulators and lawmakers who policed certain industries become consultants, and some members of private industry get appointed by governments to become ministers. Critics say this cozy relationship between governments and the private sector creates a so-called moral hazard and presents many instances of conflicts of interest. Efforts to stop this revolving door have been introduced in recent years around the world, especially after the 2008 global financial crisis. The European Commission has Article 245, which directly deals with moves similar to Barroso's jump into the private sector. It states that they will respect the obligations arising therefrom, and in particular their duty to behave with integrity and discretion as regards the acceptance after they have ceased to hold office of certain appointments or benefits. Barroso is far from the first to appear to defy this rule. In fact, his switch into the private sector is the latest in a very long list of defections on both sides of the Atlantic. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair has repeatedly said that he's not a banker or businessman, but he's currently a senior advisor for the biggest bank in the U.S., J.P. Morgan Chase. Blair makes nearly $3 million a year for doling out advice.
To do what is necessary to bring recovery back on track.
U.S. President Barack Obama's first Treasury Secretary, Tim Geithner, is president of private equity firm Warburg Pincus. He was a main architect in the rebuilding of the U.S. banking system from 2009 to 2013.
Which will provide additional accommodation for the economy.
There's also Ben Bernanke, the former chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve, who oversaw the recovery from the so-called Great Recession. He's now a senior advisor for hedge fund Citadel and is chairman of the advisory board for PIMCO, an investment management firm. So despite all the outrage by certain EU and French officials and measures in place to try and steady the revolving door, it keeps on spinning, whether regulators and the general public like it or not. Ahmad, CCTV.